Well, the DNA test came back and shows that line actually started in Mexico, the Guadalajara area.
I know something that maybe even my ancestor didn't know.
Scientists tried to compare the DNA of Mexicans with people from all over the world. At first, they expected to see a simple mix of indigenous and European roots, but as they looked deeper into the genetic data, things did not stay simple. Inside millions of DNA markers, they found hidden patterns that were not fully understood before. However, one result stood out more than all the others, and it changed what many people thought they knew about history and identity. What exactly does this result say about Mexican DNA? Join us in this video as we reveal the details. The result that stood out after Mexicans' DNA comparison. Modern Mexicans come from many different groups of people. Their history is long and filled with movement, change, mixing, and survival. When people ask who has the closest DNA to Mexicans, there is no single answer because Mexican ancestry is made from many different roots joined together over hundreds and thousands of years. The biggest part of Mexican ancestry comes from the first people who lived in the land long before Europeans arrived. These people are called indigenous people. They built cities, farmed the land, created systems of government, and developed cultures that lasted for generations. Their bloodlines continue strongly in Mexico today. Many indigenous groups helped shape Mexican ancestry. Some of the best-known groups include the Nahua, Maya, Zapotec, Mixtec, and Otomi peoples. These groups lived in different places across the country. Each group had different languages, traditions, and ways of life. Even though they were different from one another, together they built the base of what many Mexican people are today. Many Mexicans still carry a strong amount of indigenous ancestry. Modern DNA studies often show that indigenous roots remain one of the strongest parts of Mexican genetics. This connection is not something distant from the past. It remains alive today through family lines, traditions, languages, and communities. These indigenous roots also connect Mexicans to many other native people across the Americas. People from parts of Central America and South America often share similar ancestry. Countries like Guatemala, Peru, and Colombia have populations with strong indigenous roots too. This is because long ago, before countries and borders existed, ancient groups moved across large areas of land and settled in different places. Modern borders came much later. The DNA of people does not follow political lines. Instead, it follows family lines and old migration paths. This is why some indigenous groups living in different countries today can still have strong genetic similarities. Over time, another major change happened. In the 1500s, Spanish explorers and colonizers arrived in Mexico. Their arrival changed many parts of life, including culture, language, religion, and genetics. As Spanish settlers mixed with local populations, new family lines were formed. This mixing created one of the most important parts of modern Mexican identity. European ancestry became part of the population. This influence can still be seen today in physical features, language, traditions, and family histories. The Spanish influence did not spread equally everywhere. Some areas had stronger European settlement than others. Northern parts of Mexico generally had more mixing with Europeans, while some southern regions kept stronger indigenous populations. As time passed, many families carried both indigenous and European ancestry together. This led to the rise of what became known as mestizo heritage. A mestizo person is someone with mixed ancestry, usually indigenous and European. Mestizo identity became very common in Mexico because generations of families continued to mix. Over hundreds of years, these family connections created large populations with blended backgrounds. This mixed heritage is important because it explains why Mexican ancestry cannot be placed into only one category. A person may have strong indigenous roots while also carrying Spanish ancestry. Another person may have more European ancestry depending on where their family came from. Migration also played an important role. Families moved between regions for work, trade, marriage, and survival. As people moved, communities mixed even more. Today, many Mexicans discover through DNA tests that their ancestry includes different percentages of indigenous and European roots. These results often surprise people because family history can be more complex than expected. The story of Mexican ancestry is not about one group replacing another. It is about different groups coming together over time. This process created a population with deep roots and strong diversity. Ancient civilizations left behind more than buildings and traditions. They left behind bloodlines that continue through millions of people today. Their influence can still be seen in food, language, celebrations, farming practices, and cultural values. Understanding these early connections helps explain why Mexican ancestry has strong links not only inside Mexico, but also across much of Latin America. These roots form the foundation for understanding the full picture of Mexican genetics and explain why the search for the closest DNA connections often leads back to indigenous ancestry first. Indigenous and Spanish roots were only part of the story. So how did other influences help shape modern Mexican ancestry? Stay tuned for more. Mixing, diversity, and the many faces of Mexican ancestry. Mexican ancestry became even more complex because Indigenous and European roots were not the only influences shaping the population. Another important part of the story came from Africa. During the colonial period, Africans were brought to Mexico through slavery. Many worked in farms, mines, homes, and businesses. Over time, African communities mixed with local populations and became part of Mexico's growing diversity. African ancestry is often strongest in coastal regions. Places like Veracruz and Guerrero show stronger African influences than some other parts of the country. Families in these regions may carry African genetic markers that have remained for generations. African influence is not only found in DNA, it can also be seen in music, food, dance, language, and traditions. Many cultural practices that exist today carry pieces of African history. This combination of Indigenous, European, and African ancestry created a very unique population. Instead of having one simple identity, Mexico developed many different identities across regions. This same kind of mixing also happened in other Latin American countries. Nations such as Peru, Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, Cuba, and Puerto Rico experienced similar histories. Indigenous people mixed with Europeans and African ancestry also became part of many populations. Because of this shared history, Mexicans often have genetic similarities with other Latin Americans. The percentages may differ from country to country, but many populations share overlapping ancestry. Migration made these connections even stronger. People moved between countries for trade, jobs, family, education, and safety. As people moved, they brought their cultures and family lines with them. Modern science has helped explain these connections more clearly. DNA studies allow researchers to examine family origins and population history. Scientists study different parts of DNA to understand where people came from and how groups are related. Research often shows that indigenous ancestry remains very strong among many Mexicans. European ancestry also appears widely, and African ancestry is present in many communities. These studies are useful for more than history. They can also help doctors and researchers understand health conditions that may appear more often in certain populations. Another important group connected closely to Mexicans is Mexican Americans. Many families living in the United States have strong ties to Mexico through parents, grandparents, or earlier generations. Border communities especially show strong connections. Families often live on both sides of the border. Relatives may be spread across different cities and countries while still staying connected. Historical border changes also affected this relationship. Some areas that are now part of the United States were once connected more closely to Mexico. Even though political borders changed, family lines remained. DNA testing often shows strong similarities between Mexican Americans and people living in Mexico because of these continuing family relationships. An important fact many people miss is that there is no single Mexican DNA type. Mexico is a large country with many regional differences. Northern Mexico generally shows stronger European influence because of historical settlement patterns. Southern regions often show stronger indigenous ancestry because many native communities remained active and connected to their traditions. Areas like Oaxaca, Chiapas, and the Yucatan Peninsula often have deeper indigenous roots. Other regions may show more mixed ancestry. This regional diversity means two Mexicans from different parts of the country may have very different ancestry results while both being fully Mexican. The story of Mexican ancestry is really a story of movement, survival, adaptation, and mixing. Indigenous roots built the foundation. European influence changed the population. African ancestry added another important layer. Migration continued shaping communities across centuries. Because of all these factors, there is no single group with the closest DNA to all Mexicans. The answer changes depending on ancestry, family history, and region. What remains clear is that Mexican ancestry reflects one of the richest and most diverse human stories in the world. It is a story built from many people, many histories, and many generations coming together. If Mexican ancestry was already shaped by indigenous roots, European influence, and centuries of mixing, could the story go back even further than anyone imagined? Let's delve deeper. Ancient origins and the hidden layers inside Mexican DNA. Modern research into indigenous Mexican DNA has revealed that the history of Mexican ancestry is much older and more complicated than many people once believed. Scientists wanted to understand where the earliest people in Mexico came from and how different groups mixed over thousands of years. To do this, researchers carried out one of the largest studies ever done on indigenous populations in Mexico. DNA samples were collected from 1,411 people living in 92 different indigenous communities spread across the country. These communities came from different regions: mountains, valleys, deserts, and forests. The goal was to see if there were hidden connections between these groups and ancient populations from around the world. Scientists examined around 2.7 million genetic markers from the samples. These markers act like tiny pieces of history stored inside human bodies. By comparing these markers with ancient populations, researchers hoped to understand where early populations came from and how they moved across the world. The findings surprised many researchers because the genetic picture inside indigenous Mexican communities was far more complex than expected. One discovery stood out immediately. Scientists found unusual ancestry patterns that did not fit neatly into known migration stories. Inside the DNA of some indigenous groups, there appeared to be signals from an ancient population that scientists could not fully explain. Researchers described this as a strange or unknown ancestry signal because it did not match any well-known ancient civilization or recognized migration route. This unknown ancestry does not have a known language, recognized culture, or clear archaeological record attached to it. Yet its presence appears inside living people today. Researchers began comparing indigenous Mexican DNA with ancient populations from different parts of the world. They examined ancient Egyptian DNA because Egypt represents one of the oldest major civilizations. The comparison showed almost no close connection. Ancient markers found commonly in Egyptian populations appeared at very low levels among indigenous Mexican communities. Scientists then looked at Mesopotamia, often called one of the birthplaces of civilization. Again, the results showed little evidence of direct ancestry links. Similar comparisons were made with populations connected to the Indus Valley civilization. These tests also showed weak connections that were too small to suggest strong ancestral relationships. Ancient East Asian populations were also examined because many migration theories suggest early Americans came through Asia. Researchers found small overlaps, but not enough to explain the full ancestry picture. Comparisons with Anatolian populations and early Europeans also showed limited connections. After examining many major civilizations, researchers realized they might be asking the wrong questions. Instead of looking only at famous civilizations, they started looking deeper into human prehistory. They shifted attention away from cities and kingdoms and focused on migration waves that happened long before recorded history existed. Scientists now believe the ancestry story of indigenous Mexicans may involve several different migration waves instead of one simple movement into the Americas. The oldest ancestry layer appears connected to very early groups that crossed into North America, when sea levels were lower and land connected Asia and North America. These people moved into lands that looked very different from today. Ice covered large areas. Giant animals still walked the continent. These early groups carried ancient maternal markers known as haplogroup A. This ancestry layer appears widely across indigenous Mexican communities and is considered one of the deepest ancestry signals found. But this first layer was not alone. Evidence suggests more groups followed later. These findings suggest the earliest population history of Mexico may have involved repeated movements of people arriving at different times, taking different paths, and mixing slowly across thousands of years. This made the ancestry story more layered than many researchers expected and opened new questions about how early populations spread across the Americas. If early migration created the first layers of Mexican ancestry, what happened when new groups arrived and mysterious genetic signals began to appear? Let's find out. Migration waves, mystery ancestors, and the role of geography. As researchers continued studying the genetic history of indigenous Mexicans, more evidence appeared showing that early migration into the Americas may have happened in multiple stages. The second ancestry layer appears connected to a maternal marker known as haplogroup B. This ancestry pattern appears in some Pacific populations and island communities far from Mexico. Because of this, researchers think some ancient people may have traveled along coastal routes, rather than only crossing inland routes. Coastal migration theories suggest early groups may have moved along shorelines, slowly spreading south and mixing with communities already living in the region. Another ancestry layer is linked with haplogroup C and Y chromosome haplogroup Q. These markers suggest additional migration waves entered the Americas after earlier groups had already settled. Instead of replacing older populations, these later groups mixed with people already living there. Over thousands of years, this mixing created more genetic diversity. But one ancestry signal created even bigger questions. Scientists discovered the presence of haplogroup X2A in certain indigenous populations. This ancestry marker does not fit neatly into common migration models. Researchers found that it does not clearly connect with the same ancestry sources normally used to explain population movement into the Americas. Because of this, scientists suggested the possibility of a previously unknown ancestral population. This group has sometimes been described as a ghost population. The name does not mean supernatural. It simply means scientists can see traces of these people through genetics, but cannot clearly identify them through language, buildings, tools, or written records. Researchers believe this unknown group may have entered the Americas, mixed with local populations, and later disappeared as a separate people. Their genetic legacy survived, even if their cultural identity did not. This unusual ancestry signal appears more strongly in some regions than others. Researchers found higher concentrations in parts of Veracruz, Tabasco, Oaxaca, and Chiapas. These regions are important because they also connect with some of the oldest civilizations in Mesoamerica. Areas linked to early societies show ancestry patterns that may reflect very old population histories. Researchers became especially interested in regions connected to the Olmec civilization because unusual ancestry markers appear more often there. Scientists continue studying whether these patterns represent isolated populations, old migration events, or something still undiscovered. Geography also played a major role in shaping Mexican ancestry. Mexico is filled with mountains, deserts, valleys, forests, and high plateaus. These natural barriers separated communities for thousands of years. People living in one valley could remain separated from people living in another valley for generations. This isolation allowed groups to develop different ancestry patterns over long periods. When new migration waves entered different regions, they mixed with local populations, but often stayed isolated because travel was difficult. This created many small ancestry pockets across the country. Some populations developed unique traits because they remained separated for long periods. Geography helped preserve old ancestry signals that may have disappeared in places with easier movement. Because of this isolation, Mexico developed one of the most genetically complex population structures in the Americas. Different regions kept different ancestry layers alive. Mountains protected some communities from outside influence, while valleys created small population centers that evolved separately. Modern genetic research continues uncovering these hidden stories. What researchers have found so far suggests that indigenous Mexican ancestry is not the result of one migration or one person. If ancient civilizations and early migrations built the foundation of Mexican ancestry, what happened when new groups arrived and reshaped that story over time? Let's learn more. Survival, migration, and the hidden layers of Mexican ancestry. Modern Mexican ancestry did not come from one single group. It was formed slowly over hundreds and even thousands of years. Many different people came into the land at different times. They came through travel, trade, war, and migration. The strongest base of Mexican ancestry is indigenous. These are the original people who lived in the land for thousands of years before outside groups arrived. Their ancestry is still the largest part of the genetic makeup in many regions today. But over time, other groups also became part of the population. They joined through mixing, survival, and life changes that happened across history. One important group that became part of Mexican ancestry is African people. During the colonial period, many Africans were brought to Mexico by force through slavery. They did not come by choice. They were taken from their homes and brought across the ocean. After they arrived, many of them lived in different parts of Mexico. Over time, they mixed with local indigenous and other communities. Because of this mixing, African ancestry became part of Mexican genetics. Today, it is still seen in many family lines. It is especially strong in coastal areas like Veracruz and Guerrero, where many enslaved Africans were first taken. Even now, their genetic traces remain in the people of these regions. African ancestry is also part of Mexican culture, traditions, and community history. It helped shape population growth and local identity in many areas. Another smaller but still important part of Mexican ancestry comes from Asia. For many years, ships traveled across the Pacific Ocean between Asia and Mexico. These ships carried goods, workers, traders, and travelers. They moved between places like the Philippines, China, and Mexico. This long trade route connected distant parts of the world. Some Asian people stayed in Mexico and became part of local communities. Over time, they mixed into the population. Today, Asian ancestry can still be found in some Mexican families. It is usually smaller compared to Indigenous, European, or African ancestry, but it is still part of the genetic picture. Many people only discover this when they take DNA tests and see unexpected Asian links in their results. This shows how connected different parts of the world have always been. Even after colonization and major changes in society, many indigenous communities were able to protect their ancestry. Some groups lived in hard-to-reach places like mountains, deep forests, valleys, and remote villages. These places were far from big cities and outside control. Because of this, they had less mixing with outside groups. This helped them keep their older genetic patterns. In states like Oaxaca, Chiapas, and the Yucatan Peninsula, many communities still show very strong indigenous ancestry today. Some of these patterns are very old and have stayed the same for thousands of years. In many of these areas, people still speak indigenous languages. Language and ancestry often stay connected in the same places. Geography also played a big role in shaping Mexican ancestry. Different places have different environments. Some areas are hot and tropical. Some are dry deserts. Some are cold mountains. People living in mountains had to adapt to low oxygen levels. People in tropical areas had to deal with diseases, heat, and different food sources. Over many generations, the human body slowly changed to survive in each environment. This created differences in physical traits across regions, even within the same country. Modern science also shows that ancestry is linked to health. Researchers have found that some indigenous groups have genetic traits that help control blood sugar. These traits may come from old diets and lifestyles that shaped the body over long periods. Other groups have immune system traits that help them fight certain diseases. These differences help explain why some health conditions appear more in certain communities than others. Because of this, genetic research is now used in medicine to understand disease risks and improve treatment for different populations. What happens when we stop looking at race as biology and examine the real science of how human differences were shaped over time? Let's take a closer look. What human DNA really shows across the world. Human DNA has been studied in a very large global research project that looked at more than 5,000 people from many different parts of the world. These people came from Africa, Europe, Asia, the Americas, islands in the Pacific, mountain regions, and very remote villages. The aim of the study was simple. Scientists wanted to understand how different humans really are at the level of genes. They wanted to know if race is truly biological or just something people believe. When all the results were collected and compared, the findings changed many long-held ideas. The most important discovery was that all humans are almost the same at the DNA level. About 99.9% of human DNA is shared by everyone on Earth. This means that only a very small part, about 0.1%, makes people look different from each other. This small part controls things like skin color, hair type, face shape, and some body features. These are the things people usually use to define race. But science shows they come from a very tiny part of our full genetic code. The study also showed that Africa has the highest level of human genetic variety. This means there is more difference between people inside Africa than between people from Africa and the rest of the world. Two people who live in nearby places in Africa can be more different in their DNA than an African person and a European person. This makes sense when we look at human history. Modern humans first came from Africa about 300,000 years ago. For most of human history, people lived only in Africa. Over time, groups moved to different environments inside the continent and slowly became more diverse. Later, about 70,000 years ago, some small groups moved out of Africa to other parts of the world. When they left, they only carried a small part of the total genetic variety. This is called the founder effect. It means a small group starts a new population, but it does not carry all the variation from the original group. As humans moved farther and farther from Africa, genetic diversity became smaller and smaller. This is why populations in distant places like the Americas have less variation compared to Africa. The research also showed that visible human traits like skin color, hair texture, and facial features are a very small part of the genome. They make up less than 0.01% of all human DNA. These traits did not come from deep human differences. Instead, they developed recently in human history as ways to survive in different environments. For example, lighter skin developed in places with less sunlight, so the body could produce enough vitamin D. Dark skin developed in areas with strong sunlight to protect the body from damage. These changes happened slowly over time and in different places, not from separate human groups. This process is called adaptation, where the body changes to fit the environment. The study also made it clear that most important human traits are not visible. Things like disease resistance, metabolism, and immune system strength are found across all populations. These traits cannot be predicted by how a person looks. People from any group can share similar strengths or health risks. This shows that human biology is more complex than appearance. If human DNA shows that we are all one connected family, then how did centuries of mixing, migration, and adaptation shape the visible differences we see in people today? Let's find out. Human history is a story of mixing and shared origins. Human history is not a story of separate races living apart. It is a story of movement, mixing, and connection. For thousands of years, humans have traveled, met, traded, fought, and formed families across all parts of the world. Because of this, no population today is pure or completely separate from others. Ancient DNA shows that people in Europe, Asia, Oceania, and the Americas all carry mixed ancestry from different ancient groups. This means human beings have always been connected, even in very old times. There has never been a group that stayed fully isolated forever. The study of ancient DNA shows that Europe was formed from at least 3 major ancient populations. These included early farmers who came from Anatolia, ancient hunter-gatherers who already lived in Europe, and steppe herders who moved in from the east. These groups mixed together over time to form modern Europeans. Similar patterns are found in Asia, where many waves of migration mixed over thousands of years. In the Pacific Islands, people also show a mix of ancestry from different ancient groups who traveled across the ocean. In the Americas, native populations show strong links to ancient Siberian groups, showing how humans moved across land bridges long ago. These patterns show that human history is built on repeated movement and mixing, not separation. Another important finding is that physical differences between humans are not linked to deeper abilities or value. They are simply adaptations to local environments. For example, people living in cold places or low sunlight developed lighter skin over time. People living in hot and sunny places developed darker skin to protect their bodies. In cold mountain areas, some populations developed stronger lungs to survive low oxygen. These changes happened in different places for the same survival reasons, not because humans belong to different biological categories. This shows that nature shapes humans based on environment, not race. The research also explains that some diseases appear more often in certain regions, but this is also due to environment and survival history. This does not mean one group is better or worse. It only shows how the body adapts to local dangers over time. Many health differences are shaped by geography and history, not race. Another major conclusion is that the idea of race is not biological. It was created by people in history during the 17th and 1800s to classify human groups. These ideas were often used to justify unfair treatment and inequality. Humans cannot be divided into clean genetic boxes. Instead, human variation is smooth and continuous across populations. The most important message from all the data is that all humans share common roots. When scientists trace family lines far back, they find that all humans share recent common ancestors. Human ancestry is like a large web, not separate lines. Everyone is connected through shared history. Differences between people are small and do not create separate groups. Instead, they show how humans adapted to different places while still remaining one family. What do you think about Mexican DNA? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for following this deep look into human DNA and the hidden truth about our shared origins. If this story changed how you see race, ancestry, and human differences, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more stories. See you there.